All
All
right.
right.
We are live. Welcome. We'll give people a few minutes to join, but I don't know about you, Melissa. Where I was in the Northeast this morning, it was starting to feel like fall, a little chilly.
Yeah, I had to wear a long sleeve shirt. I didn't mind it though.
What do you
Ready
do?
for it.
Do you keep running even when it gets real cold?
Yeah. Yeah. I prefer running in the cold. It makes me go faster.
Yeah.
Just the motivation to get back inside.
Right. Not as much sweat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually picked one of my apple trees this weekend and they were nice and crisp and mostly not bug bitten, so that's always good.
Oh, nice. We went apple picking at an orchard this weekend, but
Brought the
the
kids,
time of
that's
the
always
year.
fun. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. They love it. All
Cool.
right. Well, I think about a minute has passed. That's usually enough time for most people to come in. I'm sure we'll have some people streaming in for a few more minutes, but I'm going to go ahead and get started because I think we're going to we are going to cover a lot during this presentation, and I think we might come up on time, especially if we get a lot of questions, which we usually do for this type of data. So we'll get started. All right, so welcome to our 2025 best practices presentation for employee emails. Today, we're going to go over some of our recommended best practices for you to communicate to your employees. And the data that we're going to present comes from our annual benchmark report, which analyzes data from over 4 billion emails to 12 million employees globally. And we look at this data each year and then put together best practices for internal comms. Joining me today is our managing director here at Polite Michael DeRocher.
Hello.
Just hello, just a few housekeeping items before we get started. This session is being recorded. You'll receive a copy of the recording after the presentation. You'll also receive a copy of the benchmark report and our best practices guide. Microphones are muted, but you can use the Q&A function to ask questions. And we'll be checking these periodically throughout the presentation and then, of course, at the end of the presentation as well. So first, I just want to talk a little bit about how this information is gathered. For the last 5 years, we've been putting together this benchmark data. So where does it come from? It's our anonymized aggregated data from our customers. And that's, again, 4.8 billion internal emails that have been sent to over 12 million employees worldwide. And as Polite has grown, we've gotten more data to work with. We also have about 20% of our customers with an on-premise server, so that data isn't included in this report. This is only looking at our cloud service customers. And our customer base is broad, so we're able to get a good sample size. We include a diverse range of recipients across the 10 major S&P industries to provide robust data points. And we also get data from a nice range of geographies because Polite is used all over the world. And the benchmark report is looking at emails sent over the past 3 years with comparisons from year to year. When we sent out the registration, we had some space for questions. So I'm going to touch on a few of those questions as we go along as well. One of them we received was, how can we increase employee engagement through internal emails? What's the average readership of internal emails within companies in the GCC and Middle East region? So that's exactly what we're going to talk about today with our best practices. And also in the benchmark report, we break down our metrics like the open rate, read rate, and click-through rate by industry and by distribution size, so you can compare yourself with similar companies. And then one more question to touch on before we get deeper into the presentation. Someone asked what the average attention rate is for each sector. And they mentioned that the benchmark report provides audience and open attention rates. So the average attention rate is shown in the report broken out by industry. And attention is a Polite specific metric. We've recently broken that metric out further into what we call audience attention and open attention rate to provide more accurate data. The definition of attention rate, we'll be touching on attention rate a bit in this presentation, so I want to define it up front. It's looking at Of the people who've opened the message, the percentage of viewers who read more than 3 seconds. So a low attention rate could indicate issues with the subject line, the time and date sent, or the from email address. And audience attention rate is just the opens minus ignores divided by delivered, whereas the open attention rate is the opens minus ignored divided by the sends.
So the
Excuse me.
audience is looking at the total distribution size, like everybody that's on your list. In a lot of cases, former employees are still on the list, so you would never expect an open from them. So then the open attention rate basically does the same math. They didn't ignore it, they didn't immediately delete it. So they paid attention, which is really our measure of reach, like how many people actually looked at the message. And then the open attention is of the people that we know opened it, how many paid attention. So it's kind of two different ways of doing the same math.
Thanks, Michael. All right, so email remains the primary communications channel for organizations despite the proliferation of other channels in the market. I know there's a lot of apps out there, meeting tools. But year after year, when we conduct a channel survey, we find that email is still the #1 channel for disseminating information to employees, and not just by a small margin either. And we saw almost double in email volume in 2020 when the pandemic began and people started working from home more. And that volume stayed high. The average number of emails sent is still above the pre pandemic average. And this high volume has had a negative impact on metrics that we've seen in our benchmark data. Engagement rates have declined during that time period, but we're now seeing that as the volumes are stabilizing, the average metrics are rising. And
Yep.
another,
So
oh, go
as the
ahead.
volume, yeah. So you can see the big spike in volume, the bars or the volume, and this is kind of normalized on a per 1,000 employee basis. So the big spike, lots more email was being sent out, and rates declined. As volumes went up, people's response to them declined, and then now we've seen that email volume kind of come down to still higher than pre-pandemic, but a more normal level. And as we anticipated last year in this webinar, we're seeing those rates start to turn back up. So that kind of we'll talk about the email overload issues later, but basically more volume always has a impact. Less volume allows people to engage more.
Yep, and that was one of the comments that we got, was that someone said in their comms audit they did at work, they discuss what they call the email paradox. So employees say that email is their preferred way to receive information, but then they complain that they receive too many emails. So we're going to be addressing this email paradox a lot in this presentation. And PoliteMail helps you get measured results. So this benchmark information shown on this slide is available in PoliteMail, so you can see how your engagement is improving over time. And with PoliteMail, there are many different ways to take a look at what you're doing with your communications and see what's working or what's maybe not working and make improvements based on the data. And we've seen that communicators who use PoliteMail for more than 2 years have significantly improved all of their key metrics. So the top 20% of communicators have increased their attention rates by 33%, their readership by 82%, and clicks by 69%. So those aren't small margins. And before we get into the best practices, we want to take a look at how hard you communicators are working. You're putting a lot of work into your employee communications, so you want to measure if it's paying off in terms of employee engagement and show that to your leadership. And I know you know how hard you're working, but we've actually quantified it for you here. On average, communication teams, which team sizes vary, produce 13,312 words in a month. So there's a lot of writing going on. This translates to about 26 email broadcasts per month And on a per employee basis, to normalize this for different organization sizes, each employee is getting about 50 minutes of content sent to them each month, as well as 170 links. So that's a lot of content that employees are receiving.
A lot of things to click on.
Yep. And we'll talk about links further on in the presentation. And if you've ever wondered how long your email content is relevant for, we've pulled this data for you as well. And we've broken it out into mornings in this left-hand chart versus afternoons. And you'll see that between 34 to 38% of people who open the message will see it within the hour after you send it. And then half the openers will see it within 2 to 4 hours. And then almost all will view the message within 24 hours after sending it. And you can see there's hardly any interactions on both charts after 3 days. So if you were going to follow up to an email, following up on the second or third day would be ideal timing. And as far as timing for when the email should be sent, whether it should be morning or afternoon, prior to 2020, the shift to working from home, mornings used to outperform afternoons. But now we see that it's about even, and actually afternoons perform better the next morning. So you can see that little bump in the chart right there. And that's probably because the message is closer to the top of the inbox when they come in the morning. And what you want to know is if employees are even reading the emails you send. So Polite Mail, unlike some competitive products on the market, measures actual time with the message open, not some arbitrary estimate, so that you can truly see if employees are reading the emails that you send out.
Yeah, so some tools will give you a 9-second cutoff. The way they derive that is just measuring network connections. And they just came up with that as some threshold. If the network connection is established for this is the steps, and if it doesn't get cut off before then we'll call it at least 9 seconds. Whereas Polite Mail, even our 3-second measurement is precise. Like we're actually measuring how long that email is open, which is a strong indicator of how much they're actually reading. And then we do track it left open, right? So if they open the email and go get coffee, then we do cut it off at a certain point.
Yep, I get that question all the time. So thank you for addressing that. And you as a communicator is involved in and critical to all of these important company objectives that we see here: employee retention and engagement, management directives, news and events, and much more. And having this data to provide to leadership demonstrates the ROI of your internal comms. So how can you reach your audience and cut through the content overload? The first step is to grab their attention, which is something that we measure, and then have interesting content for them to read. Again, another item that we measure, so that they can change their mindset and then get them to take action, whatever that is, whether it's a link in the email or something else. And it all starts with attention, which is why we measure it with Polite Mail. But like we said, employees often complain about receiving too many emails. So how can you effectively communicate without overwhelming your employees? The solution is email intelligence. Just some data from Gartner research that we found, 23% of employees and 32% of managers report experiencing high information burden, where 49% of employees dealing with high information burden reported low intent to stay with their current companies. 57% of employees say they often receive multiple communications about the same or similar topics at the same time. And the average employee wastes 3 hours and 20 minutes per week dealing with information burden. So that email paradox comes up here again. People want to receive the information, but they don't want more emails. So how can you effectively communicate without overwhelming your employees?
And just in Gartner's case too, they were measuring beyond just email, right? Email was a component, but they were looking at all the various ways that employees get information, pushed to them.
Yep, exactly. So specifically in this presentation, we're going to discuss what people want for emails as far as, best practices. And research shows that people get over 100 email messages per day. I'm sure a lot of you are hearing that and say, I get way more than that per day. So we all filter messages out to conserve our limited attention. And here's how we found that people filter their email overload. They look at what you're sending, so make sure to optimize the content of the email. They look at who the email is from, so people filter based on that from email address, whether it's generic or it's from an executive. They look at when the message is sent, so when it arrives at the inbox matters as far as time of day and day of the week, and who the message is relevant to. So make sure to target your messages to your specific audience. So now we're going to get into our best practices and give you the data to improve upon these. Before we do that, I'm just going to double check the Q&A. Pull that up to see what we have here. I do see one question in here, I think. All right, that is not pulling up for me. Will it pull up for you, Michael?
Let me look. In the chat or QA? Q&A.
QA. It's not.
Yep, I can get it. So
Okay.
on the life of the email slide, what do the 60 and 40% represent? So let me just go back to that myself and take a look. So the 1640,
Right.
60/40 is how many emails were sent in the morning, and the 40 was how many emails were sent in the afternoon. So it's just a breakdown of overall volume. And then we track the path, like what happens with those emails that were sent in the morning, so versus the afternoon.
Great. Is that the only question we had in that Q&A?
A new one, just Alex just sent one in. What's your experience with sending from a senior leader mailbox versus corporate communications mailbox? Excellent lead in. Thank you very much, Alex. We're right on that slide, so we can dive
Yep.
into the to the metrics and get you your answer there. So I'm a bit of a data junkie, data analyst. So I have had feedback from these prior that I go through them a little quick. So I'm going to try to explain what's going on in the charts. Not all communicators are data analysts. I understand it's math isn't your bailiwick compared to creative writing. So I'll try to slow down and again ask any questions that you have. So on this slide, what we're looking at is the from addresses on the left-hand chart. So, basically we categorize them into that general mailbox, right? Communications at versus an actual name versus the name of the communicator that is the user. And you can see basically there is 8% higher attention when email comes from the actual an actual person versus a general mailbox. And one of the keys we'll talk about later is basically just what those mailboxes should be. But in general, you want to have from addresses are free. I guess you do have to work with your IT. They have to cooperate to give you more of them. But you can have as many from addresses as you want. They don't have to be actual mailboxes. A lot of companies will use aliases that the from what gets displayed, is still the CEO or leader's name, but it's actually a mailbox managed by the communications team. It doesn't actually pollute the leader's inbox. So that's a pretty common strategy. And then having multiple, like a lot of companies we see will just have the one communications, comms at or communications at, and they'll put tons of various communications into those. And really the better strategy is to have more from addresses that are relevant or, kind of specific to the content. And here the chart on the right is where we kind of break that down a little bit. So we're looking at that from to pairs. So from whatever the from address happens to be to a specific distribution group. And then we map those out by frequency, how often they occur. And then we're looking at so the line, the bars are the volumes, and then the line is the readership rate. And you can see, where the volumes come in, you know, kind of the more than one per week is what most people send in those combinations. And then immediately from there on, it starts to dip down. So once you're over that, you know, and then the readership goes down because the volume has gone up, and you know, that's generally the pattern that you're going to see. So one benefit, you know, the way you can overcome that is you just have more from addresses. It creates some of that novelty, gives people a better filtering mechanism, and then you'll see those rates will tend to improve because you're not stuffing everything through one from address.
And we had a question about how to catch the attention of deskless employees who check email infrequently.
Yeah, so grabbing attention, like as we talked about, you know, that's the key. You know, from address, subject line becomes very important. Novelty is also important when getting uh, the attention of people. So something different. So like what not to do would be a subject line that was January newsletter, February newsletter, March newsletter. Actually put key little elements of the news in the subject line, just a few keywords that can spike people's curiosity. And then, you can use Polite Mail allows you to use emoticons, little icons in your subject line. That can break up the anonymity. People that check email infrequently are basically looking at a full inbox, and their eyes are going to go to the things that matter, right? They'll tend to scroll through it and stop when you grab their attention. So those are different things. And we'll talk about a few others as we go through here.
A few other questions came in while we were chatting about this. They said, this is really interesting. Sending from a variety of senders, novelty means that it will be more difficult to find an email as staff do not remember who sent it. I guess that's their concern.
Right. Yeah, I guess, that's possible, but, generally, we're not recommending like constantly changing them, right? So try to tune your from addresses to the content, right? So, HR might distribute a ton of different messages from, HR at, whereas, you could do benefits at, and, PTO at, or policies at, basically you break that HR box up into content specific areas. And then people will start to know, like, okay, this is about this, that's where that can come into play.
Another question came in. Is there a recommendation on number of mailboxes to have? Is that based on employee size?
I mean, we've seen, smaller companies with, lots of mailboxes, and larger companies with fewer. So I don't know if it's employee size. It's really just number of different audiences and number of different topics of communications content. So if you can think about, that, like keep your news and your newsletters. If you have various newsletters, have a from address for each newsletter. That is kind of the name of the newsletter. You might have leadership communications, again, better to come from each leader. So those type of strategies can be applied to determining how many mailboxes you actually need. Someone asked a question about getting attention from people in different countries. Obviously, language translation will make a difference there. Same strategies apply in terms of getting people's attention, right? Relevant subject line, from address they recognize. What shows up in the preview pane is, attention getting, attractive, and that kind of applies cross-culturally, but of course you'd have to tune it, particularly in language, to your audience.
Just a reminder, if people are raising their hands, to put your questions in the Q&A. But yes, I think we can move on to the next best practice. But yeah, there isn't really necessarily like 5 mailboxes is better than 10 mailboxes or any recommended standard. But that's the great thing about a tool like Polite Mail, is that you can get your own company benchmark data and figure out what's the ideal, number of mailboxes for your organization.
Yeah, you can see when the data changes, when you change the from address, are things getting better? Are they getting worse?
And we got a question about subject line, which we're going to cover in a few best practices, not this next one, but we'll get there and we'll check your question when we get there.
All right, so here we're just looking at those audience sizes, and in general, the tighter the audience, the smaller the audience, the more relevant the content, the better the response is going to be. And that will just tend to decline over time as the audiences get larger and larger. The content may be less applicable. Also, a lot of those people are busy doing something else, might not pay attention to that particular email or read it. So just as those distributions get bigger, you can expect the metrics to decline.
Although interestingly enough, we see a big boost in the readership and the attention with those like 30 to 50,000 list sizes.
Yep. Yeah. And so that's a segment of Polite Mail customers that actually have implemented our, email, synchronym product that pulls the data from their HR system and reduces it. So, what I always say is the fastest way to improve your email metrics is to improve your list, right? There's a denominator problem. If you have lots of ex-employees on the list, which IT people, someone leaves the company, you normally leave the mailbox because you want that email history. You might need it for legal reasons or just anything. So there's no, those mailboxes get disabled in terms of people logging into them, but they still exist and generally still exist on the list. At a certain size organization, 20, 30K, after a few years, you can end up with quite a significant number of former employees on those distribution lists, which means your basic, your attention rates, your audience attention or open rates will be much lower than you like. And when those companies, dig into those metrics, why do we only have 60% open rate? It's like, well, you've got 30% of your audience that doesn't work there anymore. How do we clean that up? So we've built tools to help support getting those lists synced because, in most companies, the payroll data, the HR data is pretty accurate. You don't continue to pay former employees, but you continue to send them email.
That makes sense. And we did get a question related to the based on employee size question. What are your average engagement rates for enterprise companies? Let's say 10,000 employees like ours. And that is in our benchmark report. We break it out by distribution size. So you can find the segment in there for your size organization and then see what the average engagement rate is. And as I mentioned, we'll be sending that out to all attendees here.
Yeah, someone asked about HIPAA compliance and integration with Workday, and we definitely have done Workday integrations. That's a pretty common one. So we can pull that data in and sync up the lists. Also, we provide some tools to let you kind of create your own lists on the fly, which is helpful as opposed to putting in IT requests. HIPAA compliance, I mean, generally, patient data is not being sent, Polite Mail is not looking at all the email, just the employee broadcast. So we are HIPAA compliant in terms of the data security and privacy practices that we have, but generally it doesn't come up. I mean, we do have it in some of our contracts, but I mean, I guess what I'm saying is generally there's no patient data that's running through our system.
And we have a lot of healthcare clients, so.
Yep. Someone asked about machine translation. And, that is something we're also looking at. We have it. I don't know if it's in the current
It is
version,
in the current version.
Yeah. So AI, makes that relatively easy nowadays. Of course, as a communicator, you probably still want to review what you get for output. But that's something we do have available. And then
the next question leads us into our next slide, actually. Is there a particular day of the week or time of the month that trends towards highest engagement?
Yeah, and we always get those questions, so we do break it down, and generally, earlier in the week is better, and you're going to get that 4 or 5% boost. So in these charts, the bars again are volume, like how much is being sent, and the lines are the rates, like what percentage of people are doing something. So you can see there's a difference. Monday, Tuesday is the highest. It declines over the course of the week, with Friday being the lowest. So even though Tuesday and Thursday have the tallest bars, that's the most email being sent. The rates are higher on Monday. Same thing, even more exaggerated with readership, right? So higher readership, and then you get the same pattern with basically click activity. So you can kind of see that earlier in the week generally performs better than later.
Yep. So Thursday or Friday shouldn't be your send day, but it looks like there's still a good amount of volume on those days, especially Thursdays. I understand I talk with a lot of customers who they don't receive all of the content for their newsletter until the end of the week. So that's why they send it out then. But what you can do with Polite Mail, you can put your message together and then schedule the send to go out on Monday morning or Tuesday morning. And with Polite Mail, we have that feature that allows you to do that without needing to be logged into Outlook for that send to go out at the scheduled time. And we
And
also
you
have a
have to,
calendar
yeah,
view.
yep, yeah. I was just going to introduce
Yeah,
the time zone sending as well, so it can
right.
land in the inbox, based on where the person sits.
Yep, exactly. So, 9 a.m. for your European colleague is not going to be the same for 9 a.m. for your East Coast colleague. So we want to make sure everyone's getting it at their 9 a.m. So Polite Mail can do that. And there's also a calendar view so you can see what's scheduled to go out or what's penciled in to go out on any given day from other users on your account.
And then we always get asked about time of day. Generally, we don't see a lot of difference between the time of day. It kind of follows volume, but if we take a look at that slide, um, here you can see, like, mornings, a little more volume, the bars, than afternoons. But the rates are pretty similar, right? But for email sent, before work, it's lower. For email sent after work, it's lower. But there is, interesting data in the clicks is, so if you look at the read, the green line, right, people are slightly more inclined to read in the morning than in the afternoon. But for clicking something, doing something, there's actually a 6% increase in the afternoon versus morning. So that's something that you might be able to take advantage of if you're sending an email where you really want someone to click something. An afternoon send should perform better than a morning send.
Another question we got was, what are the trends in email subject lines that get into more engagement,
All
which
right,
we
and we do
cover
look
here?
at, yeah, we do look at subject lines. That's always like one of the keys to getting attention. And you can see the dip, like short subject lines definitely perform better. And there's a couple of things going on in subject lines, right? If for anyone that's checking email on their mobile device, or even now in Outlook, in the little preview column, like the subject lines get cut off after about 42 letters, and that generally gets you into that 6 words or less range, right? So if you can have it be meaningful and attention getting in 6 words or less, 7 words or less, then you're in a good spot, depending on the length of the word. And then the longer ones sometimes can, continue to perform, and those generally are going to show up in full in the preview pane. And then we look at, like, what kind of words um, gets people's attention. So we take the top 20% attention getting emails, and we pull out common words. So you can see, action, announcement, update, anything with dates, times, words like new, now, news, reminders, all those things are the type of words that tend to get people's attention. You can see leaderships in there. So someone asked the question about, if I have to send from a general mailbox, can I put a leader name or something about leadership in the subject line to get a little bit more attention? And The answer here is yes, that should improve.
Yep. And going back to the number of words in the subject line. So when I'm looking at my Outlook inbox in the panel next to the preview pane or on my mobile device, a long subject line will get cut off, which um, makes sense why, these get higher attention rates. I also think with the increase in mobile usage for email, it's really important to keep your subject line short so that, people can see most of it when they're looking quickly on their mobile devices.
Yeah, the other thing that happens that Outlook does now is they put the first line, the first text of an email right below. So they cut the subject line off, but they're still presenting two lines of preview. The second line is the first line of your content. And a lot of times, if you're putting an image in there, you're going to see the image name, which isn't particularly helpful. So Polite has a preview text feature where you can put in, it won't display in the email, but you can put in exactly what you want to display in that preview.
A question came in, if you send a weekly employee email newsletter, would you suggest changing up the subject line every week or keep it constant? For example, employee connections.
Yes. So employee connections, what I would recommend there is employee connections newsletter potentially could be the name of the from address. That would be the from address you send from. Now you can use the subject line for something interesting and attention getting, right? Like we just bought a company or whatever the news is that happens to be. You can tease that in the subject line, and then your from address is the newsletter name, and now you're kind of in the best practices zone.
Yep, and we do also have a AI subject suggester. So if you're looking for some suggestions to kind of spruce up your subject line with employee mail, it's just a feature that you click on and it gives you a bunch of great suggestions.
Yeah, and I'll just mention that we're using private AI, not public AI. So we're hosting it. The data's not going outside anywhere. That's fairly common issue, particularly when it comes to contracting nowadays, that companies know we don't want to be training some public AI with our data. Yes, we agree, and we don't do that.
I want to go back before we get too far along and just go answer this question that came in. They're wondering if sending to a specific time zone is more effective. They said they've never done that because then theoretically someone will not have received the email about something and be talking to someone who has, which I have heard from clients. I think with general emails like newsletter, that it is more effective to send at the specific time zone. But when it's a like important company announcement,
Yeah,
it's
if you're doing
good to
quarterly
send at the
results,
same time.
yeah, if
Yeah.
you're doing quarterly results, you probably don't want to delay it.
Nope. Yeah, so that's what I've heard from customers that I've worked with. But as far as like, your newsletter that has your human interest stories and things like that, to get the highest readership, you don't want someone to be receiving the email in the middle of the night or, a time that's not good for them to see the email and actually read it. All right, best practice number 5.
All right. Sorry, it was got my Q&A up here. So this is always a controversial recommendation here. We're saying, stop the banners for your internal email. At the top of the message, people are always kind of, what? But so you could just, people get used to, you get it all the time in your inbox, right? You're getting external mail, marketing mail. It always has a banner identifying the brand. But what we're saying is basically the from address should really be your banner, like the last question about the newsletter name, right? That effectively can be your banner. You're telling people what the email, what the content is. It's that communications newsletter. And then you get more real estate. You got the secondary attention besides subject line and from is what shows up in the preview pane, right? As I'm scanning through my inbox, what shows up in the preview pane. And that's a very limited window. It's about 20 to 30 seconds of readership. And if you're using half of that for a banner, that people have already seen, 12 other times over the course of the year for the newsletter, you're basically wasting that prime real estate, right? So what works best is having headlines in there, and you can see in that first chart. So the blue area is your attention rate, and so you can see, like, is there anything wrong with sending a mostly text or all text email? Absolutely not. Right? They work. Most communicators are sending like 16% higher, mostly images emails, right? Because it's fun. It looks better. Like people, you're basically a communicator doing marketing. It should look, fancy. Yes, that works. But text works also, right? And in many cases, it works better. And you see that even with like the LinkedIn newsletter, right? They send you know, between 7 and 12 articles with, and it's just a one column headline summary, and they want you to click to drag you back into LinkedIn. That same type of thing can work in your corporate environment. You don't have to use images. However, if you do use images, that's the chart on the right. When it comes to readership, you're going to get higher readership if you do include images in the body of the email, right? So images worth 1,000 words. There's some truth there. People will engage more and read more when images are included versus just text. So there's a balance to strike, but generally put your headline and even calls to actions right up at the top, so they're big font right in the preview pane that people can see, and like get right away, and then include images as people scroll through to keep them interested in reading.
I always think this is a really interesting one because I think it's different than what a lot of communicators are currently doing. We see a lot of those emails with like the headline that says what the newsletter is, rather than text or calls to action at the top. So
Yeah,
try that out if you
get your key
can.
news. Yeah, if you
Yep.
go to any of the public news aggregator sites, and what you're going to see is punchy headlines, um, and then little again, punchy summary of what the news is. So if you just skim it, you're going to get the message, but then you can click through any of those, um, and get through. So that kind of same strategy can apply to email. All right. And we're always, recommending, shorter content just performs better. There's how people use an intranet versus email is different. Email is kind of like a work processing environment. You're going through, there's a lot of what you do is a lot of short messages back and forth with people, handoffs for projects, updates, all that stuff. So you're moving through a lot of brief communication, and then you get hit with this 1,500 word message, and you're not necessarily in that mode. And so, you might skim it and move on. So the first chart is we're looking at, like, okay, how much content was sent? That's the gray bar. How many minutes of read time should it take to get through this? And then the blue area is the people that skimmed, and the green is the people that read. And we have a threshold for skimmed and read, and you can see where those lines cross right just before 5 minutes. So that really, to me, suggests like that should be your kind of maximum message length, right? Because from there on, you're less and less readers, more and more skimmers. So some people are getting the message. It's not to say that long messages never work. They certainly do. It just kind of depends on the content and the audience. So the second one, we're looking at, minutes read with percent read. So again, the gray bar is how much content was sent, how much time it should take to read. And then the green bars are how much time people spent actually reading. And then the green line is the percent read. So that's of the people that are in the green bars, of the people that read, how much of it did they read? And you can see that declines, as the messages get longer, they read less. When the shorter messages, I mean, unless the messages are really short, they're still not reading everything that you sent. I mean, that's just the harsh fact of reality, right? Like, they're just not reading everything. And so that's where, aggressive editing can come into play. And then the last chart, we were doing kind of a slope analysis. So if we can determine the angle of the slope, like how much decline is there as people add words, we can calculate, basically did calculate, like for every 250 more words you send, you're going to lose about 10% of your readership. So you can see that the optimal point is that, 1 minute or less, you're above 80%. And most people above that range are going to read most of it. And then as you send more, you get less and less readership.
And it looks like there's some people that are sending 10-minute long, 2,500 word emails. So that seems like it's taking a lot of time and effort for people to create those emails, and they're not getting the payoff that they're looking for. If they absolutely needed to send a long email, what's the best practice for long form emails?
Yeah, I mean, generally, I was going to say SharePoint, but intranets are kind of should be the home for long form content. Email works good for doing, summaries, getting people like the key information that they need. And then if there is longer content, you can send it. It used to be, common that some people just didn't have a good intranet or a good way to post long form content. So if you do are in a situation where you have something that's really long and detailed and you have no other way of publishing it, email can still work. In those cases, you need to break the content up, headlines, white space, images, like let people's give, don't, that, what is it, too long didn't read, or just that wall of text. You just want to avoid that, right? You don't want to intimidate people. It needs to be airy. It can be long, but give people blocks. Another strategy people will use with polite mail is to put anchor tags, bookmark links at the top of the email with little, summaries, like so they can go right to the section that might apply to them. It'll bring them down through the email. But use of white space can make a big difference in terms of people's ability to digest a long form email.
And someone in the Q&A said, we find the shortest emails seem to have low read rates, but we wonder if that's reflective of recipients getting through the content faster than predictive averages.
It could be, some people were using like a 225 word per minute read rate, which, came out of some research. Obviously, individual results may vary. We'll have a slide later on that talks about reading ease, which, impacts how fast people read. But in general, that 225 is a good average, 225 to 250 for how, fast people can consume digital content. So there are variables, but we've seen that just holds up as a good average.
And again, I'll go back to benchmarking your own data is a great way to see what the sweet spot is for your specific organization. And just to go back this one slide, just to clarify, someone asked about these two charts again. So I want to point out that this chart on the left is attention rate, whereas the chart on the right is readership. So you get most attention by doing all or mostly text messages, but you get the most readership by doing mostly image messages. So our recommendation is to do kind of a combination, text at the beginning and then more images in the body of the message so that you can grab the audience's attention with the text headline and the text summary at the beginning, and then get them to read with more images in the body.
Right. So yeah, so we're looking at two different metrics: attention, 3 seconds or more, and then readership, which is our threshold, I believe, is 30% to call them a reader.
Yep.
Versus a skimmer. All right, and now we're looking at clicks. And again, most people would just think like, if I give people more things to click on, I'm going to get more clicks. When actually the opposite is true. If you give less people less things to click on, you actually get more clicks in total. So the first chart, we're just looking at, how does message length impact clicks and click rate, right? So your little Gray bars are email that contain links, the orange bars or total clicks that people did, right? So generally way less than what you sent out. And then the click-through rate, like how many people actually clicked, is the line, right? So really short messages, you can get above that 10% click rate, but then once you get above 2 minutes, it starts to decline pretty rapidly, as messages get longer. And then we were looking at, well, the chart on the right, like, well, does the number of URLs you offer make a difference? And again, the more URLs you offer, you actually get less total clicks. So the orange bar is total clicks from those messages. And then, so you can see if you include 1 or 2 links, you get the most total clicks. You also get the highest click rate, with the possible exception of the 6 spike there. And that's generally a function of newsletters. And it also tells you like how many, that's a good kind of maximum, that 6 to 7. I think there's some psychological research outlets, why phone numbers are 7 digits, like that's what people can hold in their mind at any one time. That's also a good upper limit for number of articles you should be including in your digest, right? So that's if you want people to click on stuff, keep it to that number or less, and then you'll optimize your click-through rate.
And one of the questions we got was pros and cons of shorter emails with hyperlinks versus emails with a lot of words or content in the body.
Well, I'm not quite following that one.
Yeah, I think they're wanting to know, like, should they send an email that has less words but more links, or should they send an email that has more words but less or maybe no links within it? All
Right.
of the story is within the body of the
Yeah. I mean,
email.
so in general, right? So in general, shorter is going to be better. Less links is going to be better, right? The less overwhelmed you present content, the less overwhelming content you present, the more likely people are going to digest it, do something with it. So if you can send a short message with 1 link, you'll see probably the maximum click rate that you would get. If it needs some explanation, generally what we would recommend there is like have a good headline, put the link at the top, have your descriptive, like, why are we asking you to do this? And then again, at the bottom, include a link. That's your second link, present it as a button or what have you. And that'll get you kind of your optimum. If you can make all of that fit, mostly within the preview pane, even better.
Try and get through these last 2 best practices with the 7 minutes we have left.
All right, well, keep it quick. So the most communicators are familiar with the Fleisch-Kincaid score. It's reading ease, grade level of the language. And what you can see here in the bars, right? Not many people are sending very easy, 4th or 5th grade level language. But those do produce the highest readership. So even though, part of that could be the frequency factor, right? Generally, we see lower frequency, better rates. And then you see generally decent rates on very difficult. Most industries, finance, tech, healthcare, have very specific terminology, acronyms. All of those will get categorized by Fleisch-Kincaid as very difficult because they're very industry specific, although within your environment, probably not very difficult, right? These are just generalizations. So that type of language can still produce, but this is another use case for using AI, tell Copilot to rewrite your language to be 4th grade level, and it'll give you back, shorter words, shorter sentences. That's what will reduce that, make that reading ease score higher, easier to read, and that should give you better results. And you can get those content stats.
In polite mail, exactly. Yep. So what I was going to mention is that we do have a reading ease feature in polite mail that shows estimated read time for the message, number of words and images, reading ease, and grade level. So you can check that before you send your email out to make sure that it's optimized for your audience.
Yeah, and you can get it from Word as well. Word has word count and reading ease. And the last one, this is a bit of a repeat, but here we're looking at that to from combination, and we were looking to evaluate like, okay, beyond just the to from, how does message length come into play? And we segmented that into short, medium, and long, by even piles of for cohorts, and those broke out. It's displayed there. I can barely read it, but 1.3 minutes, over 2.4 minutes for long. So that gives you an indication. But essentially, what you can see is that shorter messages always perform better than longer. Longer messages really fall off when the frequency is increased. All right, so people can digest, we're at more than one message per day on a from to combination. With short messages, I mean, you're still at like really high percent read. Like the people that are reading most of it, even though you're sending multiple messages to them in a day. Whereas for the longer form messages, it really falls off quite a bit, right? So that's just more evidence that, people can handle a high volume of email provided they're short. And that's our thesis, is that the email overload is really too much content in a email, not too much email overall. So when people are complaining about email overload, or I get too much email, what they're really saying is the emails that I'm getting are too long for me to process.
And someone did ask how to educate their internal partners that more email is not better and that there are some downsides to over communicating or communicating too early. So the data that we shared in this presentation, as well as the reports that we will be sending out, can help you to educate your internal partners on those best practices.
Yeah, you can use the audience size data to say, we know, we've heard the stories. Someone in leadership will say, this message needs to go out to everybody. And intuitively, like, no, this really only applies to this group. We don't need to send it to everyone, but they insist. Now you can show them like, hey, if we sent this to a more targeted audience, you're going to get better results. And you can even do like, well, we'll do it your way. We'll do it this other way, and see what we get for results, right? And you can do those comparisons and actually have the data. And most executives are fairly data savvy. They look at numbers all the time. And if you present numbers, they'll tend to believe it, as opposed to opinions, which, they have plenty of. So data always helps.
Exactly. Yep. And I hope this presentation and these reports can help you make data-driven decisions. Like I said, we'll send you these reports in our follow-up email, as well as the recording from this presentation. And one last item I want to discuss is that you can get best practices for your own company. So I mentioned a few times, different organizations might have different best practices in certain aspects of what we've discussed today. But you can get your own best practices by adding on our Power BI services that we have available now. We have a Power BI add-on, the Customer Best Practice Analysis, that you can use to get this same level of analysis on your own data. So if you like the charts in this presentation, you can actually get these for your own company data and then put together your own benchmarks and best practices. So if you are a current customer, please reach out to your account manager to get set up with that. And it doesn't look like we have any additional questions, because I think we answered all of them during the presentation.
All right, 23 answered. Great. Feel free to send more in if you get them after you review the materials. We'll be happy to address.
Okay,
All right.
great. Thank you
Thank
for your
you.
time today.
Bye.
Bye.